Hello everyone. I wanted to give everybody a video today about the quiz that's upcoming. Okay. So on the quiz, we're going to be reviewing lessons 1, 2, and 3 here. So the first three lessons that we've done this year, this will be what's included on quiz 1. So how we're going to review for this and how you would most likely want to study for this is to actually work some practice problems and um, be able to go over the answers, okay? And that's what this video is for here. So what we're going to do, just so everybody's on the same page, if you have your book, okay, so just to show you an example here, in your book, each section, in the lesson section, okay, and I'm going to give you the page numbers so that way you know exactly what page you need to be on. But after every example or two, there's a section called the On Your Own section, okay? So this on your own section here, that's where we're getting these problems for that we're looking at today to help you get prepared for the quiz. Okay, so each type of question you see here, okay, is going to be a type of question that is possible for you to see on the quiz, on the upcoming quiz. So on that end, what you would probably want to do is pause this video. So I'm just going to go through and work out all the questions here. But once I write the question down, maybe pause the video, work these questions yourself, okay, and then compare the answer that you get with the answer that I get to see if you're doing these correctly. Now, at the same time, just like before, if there's any problems, so you get a question wrong and you're not sure why you got it wrong or you're unsure what's going on, for one, I'm going to work these step by step, okay? So just make sure you pay attention and see how that I work these, and you'll see why I get the answer that I get. But if you're not sure what you did wrong in order to get the wrong answer, that's when you could email me, let me know, message me on Google Classroom, and then I will get back to you and let you know exactly what you need to change in order to get that type of question right. Okay, so this first couple of questions here, we're going to be on page 384, and this will be the last time I reference this book here today, in terms of showing you here. So from here on out, I'll list the page numbers. You go to that page number, and you're going to be looking for the questions in the section on your own. Okay. And once again, these are the questions that are going to be kind of like the questions you'll see on the upcoming quiz. Okay. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first couple questions we're going to look at is on page 384. And once again, these are the on your own questions. All right, and the instructions for these questions are that we want to write the product using exponents. So write the product using exponents. Now, one thing that I did see a lot of people doing on the practice and the homework was, instead of writing the product using exponents, they went ahead and actually figured out and evaluated what the product was. Okay, and pay attention to the directions. When you're asked to write the product using exponents, all we're asking you to do is write the base and the exponent. Okay, so what that means is, like for number 1, we have 9 times 9 times 9 times 9 times 9 times 9. Once again, we're not asking you to go through here and multiply 9 times 9 times 9. We're asking you to write this product using exponents. So in this case, the number that repeats is a 9. And it repeats 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You see the 9 6 times over here, so that's a base of 9, exponent of 6. So the answer to the first question is 9 to the 6th power. Once again, that's because the number that repeats here is a positive 9, and it repeats, or it's shown here, 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 nines, okay? And it's all multiplication, so that's why we write it with an exponent. Now, when we look at number 2, okay, now, like I said, just to let you know, you can pause the video and work these questions out yourself before you see the answer. So that way, like I said, that's the way I would do it to check yourself and make sure you know what you're doing with these questions, okay? But the second question, we have -7 times -7 times y times y times y. Now, once again, this is a little bit different than before because up here we just had numbers. Here we also have variables, and actually here we have two different bases we've got to deal with. So the first number that you see repeats is the -7, okay? And this is a very important part. Since the number is a -7, we have to use parentheses. So it'll be -7 in parentheses. It repeats twice, so the exponent on the -7 is a 2. Okay? Now, we also have y here. Well, y's are just variables in this case. That means they are representing numbers, so we can treat them as numbers. So it's not the same number as the -7, though, so we actually have to write out. So, okay, so the next base we're going to have is y. Well, how many times does the y repeat, or how many times is the y there? Well, it's there 1, 2, 3 times. So the exponent on the y is going to be 3. So that is actually all we're asking for with these types of questions. Notice up here I didn't say what this was equal to. So once again, pay attention to the directions. If it says to write the product using exponents, that's as far as you need to go, okay? You don't actually have to do this calculation. I'm just checking to see if you know how exponents work, okay? So once again, work those through, work them beforehand and then check, or if you want to try to look at them afterwards and see if you can't get the same answer, that's one way to do it too. I'm just giving you how these are worked out so that way you have something to study for the quiz, okay? Let's go ahead and look at the next part of the On Your Own. These are going to be on page 385. So the very next page there. And these are the On Your Own. And the instructions on these say evaluate the expression when x is equal to 3 and y is equal to 5. Okay. So in this case, let's go ahead and look at the one that's labeled number 3 there. And here we have -7 to the third power. Now, one thing you'll notice here is there's no x or y in this expression. So really all we have to do is look at the expression, and when we're asked to evaluate, that's when we actually go through and figure out what this number is. But we have to be careful here. The negative is on the outside of the 7 and the 3, because if it wasn't, okay, so flipping back, if we have the -7 in parentheses, that tells us the whole thing -7 repeats. But if there's no parentheses, that tells us then we have a negative, and then what actually repeats here is just the +7. So it's going to be a -7 times 7 times 7. Okay? And to actually go through here and evaluate this, you're going to have 7 times 7 is 49. 49 times 7 is 343. And then lastly, this is where the negative comes in. We have a negative of a positive 343. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the opposite, or what is the negative of a positive 343? Okay, well, that's going to be negative 343. So the answer here is actually negative 343. Okay. So pay attention to your parentheses. If there's no parentheses around your base, then the exponent is only being raised to what it's directly next to. So in this case, it's only the +7 that's being raised to the third power. This negative kind of is out here by itself, and we don't take care of it until at the end. And we'll see that again, I think, in number 5 or 6 here in just a second. But once again, make sure you're paying attention to your negatives. Now, number 4. This is a little different in that we do have variables in this expression. So we have 9 times y minus y squared, or y to the second power. So first step you need to do is rewrite the expression. And for every y that you see here, we're going to plug in a 5. And notice I'm using parentheses here. Okay, and it's a good idea to always use parentheses, as you'll see as I'll do whenever we work the other problems here. It's always a good idea to put what you're substituting in parentheses, so you know, okay, what did I plug in for this y? Well, it's whatever's in the parentheses here. It's the 5. What did I plug in for this y? Well, once again, it's the 5. And now when we go through, it's just a matter of order of operation. So if you need to, right at the top of your paper, PEMDAS or GEMDAS. Okay. Now PEMDAS or GEMDAS, we have grouping symbols, we have parentheses, but in each one of those it's just a number. So then we go to the next thing. Do we have exponents? Well, yes. So there's no exponents here, so the 9 times 5 is going to stay the same. The minus is going to stay the same, but we have 5 squared, and 5 times 5 is 25. Okay, so that's the first thing we've got to evaluate. 5 squared is 25. Now we go and we see we have multiplication and subtraction. Okay, so with multiplication and subtraction, which comes first? Well, multiplication does. So we've got to do the 9 times 5 next, which is 45. And then lastly, we just have subtraction. So obviously that's the last thing we've got to do. And 45 minus 25, the answer to this one you should have got is 20. Okay. So once again, pay attention to what you're plugging in. It's a good idea to use parentheses when you're plugging in, so that way you know exactly what operations you need to be doing. Here we knew the 5 had to be raised to the second power. And in this case, that it's 9 times 5, because the 5 is in parentheses. Okay. So let's go on to number 5. All right, so number 5, this one introduces, so same instructions as before, okay, but this one introduces the absolute value symbol, okay. So here we have the absolute value of 6 to the 4th power divided by negative x, and then we're going to close the absolute value. So once again, we want to rewrite this exactly as it is. The only difference being, instead of an x, we're going to plug in this case, a 3. And notice, once again, I'm still plugging in the value with parentheses around it. So now when we go and we actually need to simplify this, well, we have exponents, division, and then technically this is, you can consider it multiplication, but we're going to deal with that first because we have it in parentheses, okay? So 6 to the 4th divided by, well, in this case, what is the opposite of a positive 3? That is going to be a negative 3. Okay, so all we did was we took the opposite of the positive 3 there and made it negative 3. So now we go through and we've got, of course, absolute value, but then we have exponents, division, or exponents and division. So out of those two, we got to do the exponent next. So 6 to the 4th power, I'll go ahead and tell you, you might need a calculator for that. But if you do plug that in and double check yourself, you should have gotten 1,296. Okay, and once again, everything else is staying the same here. The last operation that's inside the absolute value here is division. So we have to do 1,296 divided by negative 3. That gives us a negative 343. And then here's another issue where I saw a lot of people getting mixed up on the practice and the homework. When you have absolute value, we got to remember what that does. The absolute value takes whatever's in here and makes it positive. So if it's a negative 343, it's going to make it a positive 343. At the same time, if it was already a positive 343, it would keep it a positive 343. So basically, the way you can think of absolute values is whatever's on the inside here is going to become positive. Okay, so do be careful with that. Okay, make sure you know about absolute values, because I'm going to go ahead and guarantee you'll see an absolute value on the quiz tomorrow, because that's something we need to know at this point, how to deal with absolute values. So if you need to come back and look at this example again, make sure you do that. Okay, but that's the process in dealing with absolute values. Now the last question here for this section, number 6. This one's probably the most difficult. So we have negative, and then in parentheses 7 minus x, close parentheses. The parentheses are going to be squared, okay? And then we have times y. So as we're going through here, first things first, just as always, let's rewrite the expression, plugging in all of our numbers. So 7 minus, well, I'm plugging in a 3 for x, and I'm plugging in a 5 for y. And now we go through and we do order of operations. Well, we have grouping symbols. We have parentheses here now. So if we look inside the parentheses, okay, the only operation we have inside the parentheses is the subtraction. So that's the first thing that we need to do. 7 minus 3 is going to be 4. Okay. Now we go through again. Well, negative is on the outside of the parentheses. We have exponents, and then we have multiplication. So the next thing we need to do is the exponent. So we're going to have a negative, and then 4 squared is going to be positive 16. And then we have the same issue we've had before. We have a negative out here kind of by itself, so we need to know how to deal with that. In this case, we have a negative of the 16. Okay, so a negative, or the opposite of a positive 16, is a negative 16. And then lastly, we have negative 16 times 5, which gives us negative 80. So once again, the question here was knowing how to deal with this negative on the outside, okay? And then knowing, in this case, well, what's being raised to the second power? It's whatever's inside these parentheses. So 7 minus 3 is 4, so it's 4 raised to the second power, okay? And then, like I said, the rest of it is just straight order of operations. Now, the rest of the numbers here, these should be pretty familiar to you, because it's the stuff we've just went over in the last couple sections, okay? So the next section of questions we're going to be looking at is on page 403. And these are the on-your-own questions on page 403. And on this one, we're going to start off with a number, because it doesn't give you instructions here. But the question is 21 times 10 to the 7th written in scientific notation? And then they do ask you in this one to explain. I will go ahead and tell you on the quiz, I'm not going to have you explain. I'm just going to check and see if you know if it's written in scientific notation or not. But for this example, I will go ahead and explain it to you. So the answer here, of course, is going to be no. And the reason why is, well, we have to look at this 21. The 21 is bigger than 10. So if you remember back in our notes, okay, we said the number out front in scientific notation has to be between 1 and 10, which it could also be 1 as well, but it has to be between 1 and 10. It has to be bigger than or equal to 1 and smaller than 10. Well, 21 is obviously not smaller than 10. So right off the bat there with that first number, it is a no. But if you look over here, we do have a power of 10, okay? And we do have multiplication here. So all the rest of it checks out. It's just the number 21. Number 21. So let me write that in there. The number 21 is bigger than 10. That's what I meant to write there. So sorry for any confusion there. Let me just rewrite that whole thing. That means 21 is bigger than 10. And that's the explanation that we would give to say this is not in scientific notation. But what you're going to be responsible for tomorrow is you're going to look at a number like this and just say yes or no. Okay? Now, starting with number 2, okay, all these questions we want to write the number in scientific notation, or in standard form, excuse me, in standard form. So in this case, we're going to be given numbers in scientific notation, and we're going to want to write it in normal number form. So we're going to want to write it as, just a standard number, okay? So the first number we're given here is the number 3 times 10 to the 9th power. Now this one might look a little bit weird because we just have the number 3 out here, but here's where we need to, this is the steps we need to go through. So first thing is let's write the number out first. In this case, it's going to be 3, but to know where the decimal place is, I can write it as 3.0. Okay. We do need to know the decimal place would be after the 3. And instead of just putting a decimal place without a number beside of it, we need to put a decimal, and then you can put the number 0 out here. But once we have that, we have the number 3.0. That means we're going to move the decimal place 9 places. And since this is a positive 9, we're going to go to the right. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the decimal is going to go right here. And this is the thing. All these empty spaces, we have to fill those in with zeros. Okay. So now, we're still not done yet. Let's rewrite this number. So we have the number 3, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If you wanted to, you can include the decimal, but I do have to say, I did see on the practice and the homework, a lot of people were leaving this decimal here and just leaving it like that, and that actually counted the questions wrong. Now, if it did count it wrong, I went back and gave you the points for it, especially if it was on the homework, okay? But what you need to know from here on out is if you put a decimal down, the decimal is actually useless unless you put numbers after the decimal place. So in this case, if you use the decimal, you need to put the number 0 at the end, okay? But another way to write this is just the number, in this case, it would be commas there, and there. It would be the number 3 billion, okay? So either one of these numbers would work. So either the 3 billion with the decimal or 3 billion without the decimal. And once again, you can add the commas if you want to or not. You don't have to put the commas. But the number is 3 billion here is what we've got in standard form. Number 3, okay, same exact process. So number 3 on that same page, we've got 4.7 times 10 to the negative 6. So first things first, we're going to write out the number 4.7. And obviously we can see in this case where the decimal is. The decimal is between the 4 and the 7. But now we need to move the decimal place 6 places. And where this is negative, that means we got to go to the left. So 6 places to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the decimal is going to end up right here. And in every single one of these empty spaces, we've got to write a 0. So the number we're going to have here, and once again, it kind of works this way too. We've got a decimal out front, so we can just put the decimal down. But like I said, it's always good practice if you put a decimal down, have numbers in front and behind it. So I'm going to put 0 point, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros. And then the numbers 4 and 7. Now, once again, if you didn't put the 0 out front, okay, that would be fine as well. But like I said, it is just good practice at this point going forward that if you have a decimal, always put the 0 out front. But like I said, if you do either one of these, I'm not going to count either of them wrong, okay, because these say the exact same thing. But just make sure, like I said, maybe get in the habit of, if you've got a decimal, put a 0 out front, or make sure that there's numbers on both sides of the decimal. In this case, a number in the ones place, and then numbers in the decimal places. And then the last one, like this type of question, number 4, we have 6.407 times 10 to the 8. Okay. Well, once again, we're going to start off with the number 6.407. We see the decimal is between the 6 and the 4 here. And that means, okay, we're going to move this decimal 8 places to the, and then since this is positive, to the right. Okay, so that means we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the decimal is going to end up right here. So that means all these empty spaces, there will be zeros. And then we just simply rewrite the number. So we'll have 6, 4, 0, 7, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros. And then, like I said, you can add the commas if you want. So this is the number 640,700,000, okay? But if you also wanted to write it like this, with the decimal 0, so you know where the decimal is, both of these work the same, okay? So just, like I said, if you do include the decimal, make sure you include a number after the decimal, so that way you know the decimal's in the correct place in terms of this is the ones place, this is the tenths place. Okay. Now, that's probably the most important thing you're going to have to be able to do out of these sections. So if nothing else you get out of these sections, at least make sure you look at these last 3 questions that we just did, and make sure you know how to write a number from scientific notation to standard form, because we're going to be using that later on when we look at comparing numbers. Okay. Now, the last question in this section, okay, has to do with number 5, okay? So number 5, and then they go through and tell you, okay, so you're given them the masses of Mars and Mercury in addition to what was in example 3. So instead of going through and redoing example 3 all the way through, I'm just going to list out all of the masses that you need to know, okay? And then we're going to answer the question that's being asked. So masses, and then these are in kilograms is what they tell you. So we have Mars, they say, has a mass of 6.42 times 10 to the 23rd. Mercury has a mass of 3.30 times 10 to the 23rd. And then we have what we went over in example 3, which was Jupiter having a mass of 1.90 times 10 to the 27. Venus having a mass of 4.87 times 10 to the 24. And then lastly, we have Neptune having a mass of 1.02 times 10 to the 26. Now, the question that's being asked here is which mass is least, or which has the least mass, okay? So in this case, the least mass is going to be the one with the smallest number. But once again, based on how we did the example 3 in the first place, it's going to be the opposite here. Which mass is least? Well, it's going to be the number with the least exponent, okay? So in this case, the least exponent here, out of all these numbers, you have 23, 23, 27, 24, and 26. Well, it's actually going to be one of these two in terms of the least number out of all those is 23, okay? But then we have a problem. Which mass is least? Well, we're asking for which one mass, okay? So it can't be both of these. So then we go in that we have to look at these numbers here. Okay? And we have to ask ourselves, which one's bigger or which one's smaller? So out of 6.42 and 3.30, which one of these is smaller? Well, it's going to be the 3.30. Okay? So that tells us then that Mercury has the least mass at 3.30 times 10 to the 23rd. And once again, that's because Mercury had the least number here in terms of the exponent, and then also the least number here in terms of, after we look at the exponents, the least number here out of those two with the beginning factor or the starting factor. Okay. Now, one thing that I did note in the practice and the homework is people were struggling with negative exponents. Okay. So make sure you know how to compare negative exponents. One of the most common issues I saw was in the negative exponents. Well, I'm just going to put over here, negative 31 is less than negative 27. And if you go back and look at the homework questions, or if you look at the practice questions, you'll get what I'm saying here. Okay, a lot of people missed the questions about the electrons, protons, and neutrons because they thought the negative 31 was bigger than the negative 27, so they thought the electron had the biggest mass, when in fact it actually was the smallest, because negative 31 is less than negative 27. So make sure you go back and you know what I'm talking about here, how to compare, okay, negative exponents. Should be able to compare positive exponents. Once again, which one's bigger, which one's smaller. In this case, 23 was smaller, and then that led us to look at these numbers. But once again, know what you're doing when it comes to negative numbers. Okay. Now the last set here is going to be on page 408. And once again, I'm just going to mark this every time just so you know we're on the on your own questions. Okay. And in this section, we're going to be asked to write the number in scientific notation. So this is the very last thing we covered, okay, in the very last section. So this should be the stuff that's most fresh on your mind. But in this case, we're going backwards from what we did in the last example, in the numbers 2, 3, and 4 there on the last example of, or in the last questions of writing a number from scientific notation to standard form. Here, you're going to be given a number in standard form. So like with number 1 here, you've got the number 40,000. Okay, so 40,000 there. And you'll see why I didn't write the comma here. You can if you want to, but you'll see why I don't do that here in just a second. Because, well, I'll go ahead and write it here. So what we'll do is we'll rewrite the number 40,000, and I'm going to rewrite it without commas because I want to put the decimal in here. And for the number 40,000, the decimal goes after the last zero. So what we have to do is put the decimal down. And then, like I said, it's always good to write an extra zero there to say, hey, the decimal's here. It's 40,000.0, okay? But now we know where the decimal is. And the whole goal here is we want to move this decimal to where it's after the first non-zero number. So the first non-zero number is the 4. We want to move the decimal place to right here. So we move it over there. Taking account of each step space that we do, move it. So the last thing here is we've got this number, and we could either write this as just 4 or 4.0. I'll go ahead and write it as 4.0 times 10. And then we need to ask ourselves, well, how many places did we move the decimal place? Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that'd be 4.0 times 10 to the 4. Or you could write this one as 4 times 10 to the 4. Either one of those would work. I'd be okay with either one of those. But the whole point here is we need to move the decimal place to where it's after the first non-zero number. And then, which I kind of glazed over this, is we moved it 1, 2, 3, 4 places. Well, that means our exponent has to be a positive 4 because we started off with a bigger number. So once again, 40,000 is a pretty big number. Okay, that means to make 4 into 40,000, we'd have to multiply it times 10 to a positive exponent. So in this case, the bigger number at the start means positive exponent here. Okay, and you'll actually see that with the next two examples as well. So let's go ahead and look at number 2. We have the number 6, 3, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros. So that's the number 63 million. So let's rewrite the number 63 million. And I'm going to rewrite it without the commas. And the whole reason I don't like the commas is if I'm moving the decimal place, I don't want to mistake a comma for a decimal. Okay, but once again, just like up here, the decimal for the number 63 million is at the end. And we can put a 0 at the end to let us know that that's where the decimal is. And then we have to move the decimal place in this case to where it's after the 6, so in between the 6 and the 3. So we just move it. Okay, so that's where the decimal is going to end up, which gives us the number 6.3 times 10. And then how many places did we move it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so since we moved it 7 spaces, we know our exponent's going to be either a positive 7 or a negative 7. But in this case, once again, we started off with a really big number. So in order to make this 6.3 into the really big number, we need this to be a positive 7. Okay, a positive 7 for number 2. So 6.3 times 10 to the positive 7. All right, and now let's go ahead and look at number 3. In this case, we simply have the number 502. Same thing, let's rewrite this with the decimal. So 502, the decimal is going to go after the 2. And I'm going to add a 0 at the end because it's 0.0. We can't just put a point at the end. Okay. Now, where do we want to move the decimal this time? Well, we want to move it to where it's after the 5. So we want to move it between the 5 right here and this 0. So the 5 and the 0. So we move it there and there. So that gives us the number 5.02 times 10. And then in this case, we moved it 2 places. So it's either going to be a positive 2 or a negative 2. So 1, 2. But in this case, once again, we're starting off with a fairly big number here. 502 is a bigger number. Okay, so that means we're going to have our exponent on this be a positive 2. Because once again, we want to make this 5.02 bigger. And in reality, what you want to do is compare this 5.02 with the 502. And if it's smaller than the 502, you want to make the exponent positive so you can make that number bigger. Okay. And then the last 3 questions here, you can, I guess, see that these are going to be ones with negative exponents, but let's go through these each step by step here. So we have the number 0.008. Okay. In this case, it's already written as a decimal, but just so everybody's on the same page, the decimal is in between the first 2 zeros. And with this, we want to move it to where it's after the first non-zero number. Well, the first non-zero number is actually the 8, which is at the very end. So that means we want to move the decimal place out here. But here's where we run into a little bit of an issue. We can't just have 8 point. We might need to add another 0 in there to tell us that this is going to be 8.0 times 10 to the 1, 2, 3. Well, in this case, we started off with a small number, so it's going to be a negative 3. But at the same time, instead of 8.0, if you just wanted to write 8, that works as well. Okay, so either one of these would work. I wouldn't count either one of those wrong against you if you chose either one of those. Okay, but just know what to do with that decimal place. Since it's going to end up at the end of the number, it doesn't hurt you to add a 0 at the end of the decimal. Okay, so 8.0 times 10 to the negative 3, or like I said, just 8 times 10 to the negative 3. Number 5, we have 0.000. So let's see how many zeros there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 7. So 0.0000097. Okay, so once again, we know where the decimal is here. I'm going to write it down the line below. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in this case, the first non-zero number you see is the 9. So that means we want to move the decimal place to where it would be in between the 9 and the 7. Okay, so that would give us the number 9.7 times 10. Okay, so 9.7 times 10. And how many places did we move the decimal place? Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But once again, let's pay attention to what we started off with. We started off with a very, very small number here. So if we wanted to make this 9.7 into that small number, we would need a negative exponent. So 9.7 times 10 to the negative 7. And then lastly, number 6, 0.0003003. Okay, a lot of zeros here and 2 3s. But once again, we see where the decimal is, 0 point, and then we have 3 zeros. We have the number 3, 2 zeros, and then another number 3. So now the first non-zero number that you see is the 3. So that means we want to move the decimal between the first 3 and the 0 here. So we're going to move it here, 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 and then here, which is a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So that's going to end up with us having 3.003 times 10. And in this case, we moved it 4 spaces, but since we started off with a really small number here, that means we're going to have to make this a negative 4. Okay. So like I said, go through, all right, if you've already watched this video, you see the right answers here, but go through and try. One way you can study for this is go through and answer these questions and make sure you get the same answers that I do here, okay? And I will go ahead and tell you the quiz that you'll have will have questions very similar to each of the types of questions that you saw here. So if you can go through and do every single one of these questions and get the right answer, then you should be good for the quiz coming up, okay? But with that being said, if there's any issues or questions, if you're studying and you don't understand something, please let me know, okay? Either email me or message me on Google Classroom, okay? And I will get back to you and try to help you out there with what's going on with the quiz, okay? But other than that, thank you for watching and study hard.